Dean Obadallah. He wants to be your Muslim friend.
Most Muslims, I know many, are great people.
Watch this.
People.
You're listening to the Dean Obadallah Show, where comedy meets politics and all things in between.
And welcome back, Dean Obadallah Show. We're live right here, Monday, December 17th, and it's my birthday, so it's a special day. Thank you very much. And with me as a birthday gift, now we have with us a great one of the candidates running for president right now, a Democrat, Andrew Yang, a lawyer, entrepreneur, founder of Venture for America, and a candidate for president best known for championing the idea of universal basic income, which you're all going to learn so much about if you don't. But Andrew, welcome to the show. And I have to tell you, somebody 2 months ago called and brought you up and the idea of universal basic income, which made me look you up and that concept because I had no idea. I had an inkling about the idea, but I had no idea the extent of it. But thank you, and thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it, especially in studio right here.
No, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So since we have an hour, everyone's going to get to know Andrew Yang here. We're going to talk about the politics, of course. We'll talk about Trump and the issues that you're championing. But here's an opportunity for me and listeners to get to know you, the person. And,
sure.
You know, you're both your parents are immigrants. My dad was an immigrant. Your parents are from Taiwan. They came here. I'm always curious when I speak to people who are the children of immigrants. Why did your parents pick up the United States of America to make their new home?
So my parents came over from Taiwan in the 60s. They met in graduate school at Berkeley. And at that time, U.S. universities were taking in grad students in Taiwan. I once asked my father why he majored in physics, and he said to get out of Taiwan because if you majored in physics, you got a graduate degree in the U.S. So they met at Berkeley. They got married there, and then my father got a job at GE. So I was born in Schenectady.
Okay.
But for Taiwanese around the 60s, the U.S. was very much a beacon of opportunity.
It certainly was, and I think until recently, it's been this beacon of hope for people. I mean, my dad is Palestinian, born in grew up in what's the area of the West Bank now, came here via Jordan, and picked America intentionally to have opportunity, and then brought his brothers and cousins and everyone over. He was the first one over here, and it represented something special. When you, as a child of immigrants, do you look at America in a way that you find you appreciate certain things here more because the immigrant experience was more immediate as opposed to those who have been for generations?
Well, I certainly grew up intensely patriotic, where I thought that my parents had come here for a reason, and it has worked out, frankly, very well for me and my brother. And I now have two young boys who are 6 and 3. So the immigrant experience, I mean, you probably had the same thing where you feel like you're trying to prove that you belong here in some ways. So I was one of the only Asian kids in my neighborhood in upstate New York. And so, there was always an element of trying to prove I was, just as American as the next kid.
Was it challenging at all being the only Asian kid growing up in that area?
It was not easy all the time, that's for sure, especially because I'd skipped a grade and was really skinny and dorky and had braces and giant Coke bottle glasses because they hadn't made glasses that weren't incredibly thick
right.
at that point. So I had that kind of childhood experience, and it's one reason why I think I naturally feel for the little guy or gal in a situation because I grew up very much the little guy.
On your website, you noted that I grew up pretty nerdy. So, what's an example of pretty nerdy? I know nerdy, I know not nerdy. What's pretty nerdy? What's an example you can share of your childhood growing up that was kind of nerdy?
I played Dungeons and Dragons a lot as a kid. I think that's super nerdy. So I had all those multi-sided dice
right.
that people, in the 80s liked a lot. I read all these science fiction books and comic books with my brother. Video games weren't that good at that point.
No, so Pong? I mean, I wonder what the games were when you were a kid.
It's like Asteroids, Atari 2600.
That's actually
Space
pretty
Invaders.
good. I mean, I grew up playing Asteroids all the time, going to the diner by my house. You pump quarters in and you'd play, and I just stand in the vestibule and never buy anything. They'd ask me, "Can you want to buy something?" No, I'm just playing Asteroids. What's the problem? So
yeah, me too.
That was the thing. I never did Dungeons and Dragons. I just had my friend Danny Savalas and another lawyer, Ellie Mistel, on, who were both enjoying their Dungeons and Dragons childhood. And it wasn't because I was nerdy or not. It just was not. I grew up in North Jersey. We played baseball, sports.
That doesn't sound very nerdy, Dean.
No, it wasn't. It was we just didn't, I didn't know nerdy or not. I just knew, I grew up in Lodi, New Jersey, where there were two ethnic groups. You were Italian or my father. That was the entire thing. So I'm half Italian, so it was fine. So I didn't have that problem, even though I had this weird last name, Obadallah. people thought they called me Dino growing up. So everyone Italian accepted me, and my dad had an accent, but there were so many Italian relatives there who had accents. No one was never a big problem for me. So it's a different experience for you. You grow up in an area where you're in New York State, you're alone, you're the only Asian person up there. And what was it like for your brother and your parents? Were they welcome? Did they feel welcome in New York State?
My parents. My father was a physicist, so he worked in a lab, and he generated 69 U.S. patents over his career between
Really?
GE and IBM. Yeah.
Wow.
So if you're in a lab hanging out inventing stuff, I mean, as long as your company thinks you're doing a good job.
Are there any patents or things we know? Is there something like cool, like he invented? Is there anything?
That piece of equipment right in front of us. He generated about a couple dozen patents around liquid crystal displays, so all these flat screens that we have. And what's funny is when he started in the 70s and 80s, people were like, liquid crystal displays, like, no one wants to work on that. And then it got flatter and flatter and more inexpensive. And then before you know it, his technology's in everyone's hands.
It's also interesting that I find, like, if you watch a movie and the TV set is the old tube one versus liquid crystal, like the flat screen, it dates the movie instantly. Even the movie's like 12 years old.
Yeah, totally.
Because we just watched Love Actually with my girlfriend. This is what we do. Thank you. Ron's here and he had a moment. We've been together 13 years, but we still watch it over the weekend. And we loved the movie, but there was a moment that actually took us out of it. Like, look at that tube screen. This is ridiculous. And the guy had a cell phone, was like a flip phone.
Well, I should note too that when my dad got a patent, he got paid like $250 for the patent, because that was like the trade you made, where he had like a steady salary and was hanging out supporting a family,
right?
And so anytime he generated a patent, they were like, "Nice job, here's like a couple $100." So,
I wonder if any of the patents went on to. Well, I'm chatting with Andrew Yang, a Democrat running for president in 2020. So. You didn't go into physics,
no, I didn't.
You went to Columbia Law School here in New York.
Yeah, that's right. So I went.
Why did you want to be a lawyer? I'll share why I want to be a lawyer after you tell me why you wanted to be a lawyer.
I had a quite unsophisticated thought process where I studied economics and political science at Brown in college, and then my family was really into education. My brother's a professor now. My father was a PhD, and so I thought, okay, I need to keep going to school, and law school seemed like the most direct path for someone who'd studied what I studied. I also, had done debate in high school and college, and so law school seemed like the thing. So why did you choose law school?
Why did I choose law school? Because when I was younger, I have no idea. When I was like, after wanting to be an astronaut, I wanted to be a lawyer. I'm not even kidding.
I wanted to be a secret agent.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Did you ever explore that? Because that would be so much cooler than being a lawyer.
So I watched all these James Bond movies, and I was like, James Bond can ski. I should learn how to ski. So like at any time there was like some secret agent relevant skill, I was like, I should learn how to pick a lock. I should learn how to do all this stuff.
To me, that's one of the cool. I never thought of that. Although, having an Arab dad and a Muslim name and stuff, like my dream was like a Muslim James Bond. Who instead of coming out and says James Bond, he comes out, he goes Abdullah. That would be his name, like that. So I would be like the first Muslim James Bond. But I wanted to be a lawyer because I was active. I always wanted to be in politics when I was younger. I don't know why. And then I became like president of the Bergen County Young Democrats when I was in college and stuff like that in Jersey. So I went to law school, the normal step being I'm going to go run for office someday. Yeah. And then a funny thing happened on the way to Congress. I was a lawyer for years, and I became a comedian, and that was the end of it.
For you, man, I think you dodged a bullet.
Maybe. Well, did you ever practice law at all?
I practiced law for 5 unhappy months, like 99, 2000.
Big firm?
Yeah, Davis Polk and Wardwell.
Oh, it's a big firm here in New York City. Big firm.
So I was there, and I came home from the holidays, and I was like, it's a terrible job. So I said, my parents were like, what are you talking about? It's a great job, because, they paid me pretty well.
Sure.
But I said to you earlier that I concluded that I didn't want to do that job forever, and that it was going to get harder, not easier to leave. And so I said, well, I should leave immediately then. So I left to start a .com in the waning days of the bubble, the first bubble.
And I want to talk about that company. It's interesting because if you work from the outside, people might see a law practice and think, hey, this is a great career. Maybe it's good compensation, it has stability, but that really changed. The business of the law changed, where when I worked at the law firm, partners were being let go. Partners who had worked there for 20 years because they weren't bringing business anymore. So for me, after 5 or 6 years, it was sort of like you, but it took me that much longer to say, it's time to move on, because there's not even the promise of being a partner all your life. And I didn't want to be that either. That wasn't even what I wanted to be, but they didn't have that trade-off.
Well, it's one reason why I'm running for president now is that I have friends who are investing tens of millions of dollars in automating the basic legal work that you and I used to do.
Get out of here.
Oh, completely. And if you look around, you see that there are tens of thousands of underemployed, super indebted, miserable law school graduates who can't even get that law firm job that you and I left.
Right.
So the promise of the law has completely dissipated. But law schools don't shut down just because their students aren't getting good jobs. But if you go to law firms, you see it's become this food fight where, instead of like, oh, I'm going to work here and then I'm going to be made partner, you have partners who are like, I'm not going anywhere. I just got to freaking ride this thing out. And then you have like people who are like, am I going to be made partner? It's like, well, the practice hasn't grown. So what you just said about partners getting let go. So it's law, it's accounting, it's radiology and a lot of medical tasks, because my friends are working on technology that is completely transforming many of these industries, and the traditional paths are not going to lead where people would like them to lead.
Is there any automation being built for radio show hosts? Because Ron, who's here, the producer, would hire that person because there's no health care and less wages.
Oh, it sounds ridiculous, but you can look this up. There's now actually an AI TV host that they're trotting out in China that's patterned after a real TV host, and he still seems a little fake and weird. But they can just have him read news in the middle of the night, like never rests. Like we are only 5 to 10 years away from having an AI TV personality that is more or less indistinguishable from a human.
I think Tucker Carlson already has done that on some level on Fox News. So we've got on some level the idea almost human, but not quite. I think Tucker Carlson's there.
Tucker is already clearly an AI.
So before we get into politics, so you went on .com business, doesn't work out. Then you started an education business that works out really well. What was that about?
Yeah, so I became the CEO of an education company that helped people get into high-end graduate schools, and that company grew to become number one in the United States and was acquired by a public company in 2009. So this is, I became a serial entrepreneur. Like my first startup failed, and so I just kept working and starting companies, and then this company grew and then did very well. And so I'd personally taught the analyst classes at Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, McKinsey, Morgan Stanley, and I saw all of these smart kids, sort of like you and me, Dean, back in the day, who were bankers and consultants and frankly did not like their jobs, and so they were trying to figure out like a new direction, go back to graduate school. And so I thought, what a mess. And this is right after the financial crisis. So this is like 2009, 2010. So I left my new parent company, quit my job, donated $120,000 to start an organization called Venture for America. And the thesis of Venture for America, you're going to love it. Mm-hmm. So one of the jokes I tell is like, if you are a smart kid coming out of college and you're not sure what to do, which is most kids, obviously, and you say to your parents, I'm going to go to law school. Your parents will think, oh, that's a great idea. It's really easy to find, and the government will give you a $100,000 loan, no questions asked. If you're to go to your parents and say, hey, I'm going to start a business, your parents would say it's a terrible idea. It'd be really hard to find, and no one's going to give you a $100,000 loan. So there's no mystery why we have this incredible shortage of entrepreneurs and business builders around the country and this massive surplus of miserable law school grads. So I started Venture for America to help provide a runway to entrepreneurship, to help create jobs around the country, because I thought, well, we can't have our talented kids all heading to Wall Street and Silicon Valley. We need to send some of them to Detroit and Cleveland and St. Louis and Birmingham and New Orleans. So I started Venture for America with $120K. And this year the budget's between 6 and 7 million, thousands of applicants, hundreds of graduates, and we've helped create several thousand jobs around the country.
So what did you learn from that experience about job creation?
Well, unfortunately, I learned that job creation in most of the country is going to be dramatically outpaced by the automation of labor. And so I started to believe that I was pouring water into a bathtub that has a giant hole ripped in the bottom.
Right.
Where, if you spend time in Detroit and Cleveland and St. Louis, these are places that are sort of the aftermath of the automation of manufacturing jobs. One of the comparisons I make is that if you wanted to convince someone of climate change, you might take them to Alaska or look at a glacier and see it melting. Mm-hmm. If you wanted to believe in the automation of jobs, you would bring them to Detroit or Cleveland or St. Louis or Gary or one of these cities. And then Donald Trump won in 2016. And I put it all together where I said, oh my gosh, like the reason why Donald Trump won is that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa, all the swing states that he needed to win and did win. And unfortunately, my friends in Silicon Valley know that we're about to do the exact same thing to millions of retail workers and call center workers and fast food workers and truck drivers and on and on. We're in the third inning of the greatest economic and technological transformation in the history of the world, and the third inning has brought us Donald fucking Trump. So we need to wake up to what this is doing to us.
Sure. And we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the robots are coming, and you touched on the idea that truckers, we have a lot of truckers who listen to Sirius XM. I was amazed by that. You made a specific point in an interview with the New York Times about truckers losing jobs to this. So when we come back, we'll chat more with Andrew Yang about the future, and the future in a way could be robots taking a lot of our jobs away, even jobs that people would not think potentially could be taken away by automation. You make a great point. They could be. And what's the next step to protect us to have the basic income we need to survive in this country? So we'll take a quick break, come back with more of Andrew Yang right here on the Dean Obeidallah Show.
The Dean Obeidallah Show.
Whoever's the next president, we should call them the 45th president of the United States. And this will go down as a dark time in America that we'll never refer to again.
Sirius XM Progress.
The biggest stories of the day. Right now. This is the Dean Obeidallah Show.
On Sirius XM Progress 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live right here Monday, December 17th. In studio with me for the full hour, Andrew Yang, entrepreneur, creator, founder of Venture for America. Now one of the Democratic candidates running for president of the United States. Is a formal candidate announced, I think it was in February or March.
February of this year, yep.
He's been to Iowa already 6 times.
7th time as of tomorrow, yep.
7 times tomorrow. I've been to New Hampshire 6 times. He was in the new CNN poll that came out of one of the candidates they asked people about in Iowa. So let's talk about politics and what's going on. I mean, you were quoted an article about you fear for the future of our country, and you pointed at robots. I fear robots for a different reason. I have nightmares that's different from a movie, like scary type of thing. You is more about automation. Explain to us what we're missing, because I don't think most people get the threat that you view automation really stands for this country, because especially living in Northeast and maybe in the Midwest, it's different.
Sure. So again, if you look at the data, you see that the movement towards Donald Trump corresponds directly to the adoption of industrial robots in a district. And you can actually see it as a one-to-one correlation.
That's remarkable.
And so we all know that this country has lost millions of manufacturing jobs, 5 million to be precise. It went from 17 million to 12 million. What most people do not know is that according to studies, 80% of those 5 million jobs were lost because of automation and technology. If you go into a factory now, it's a bunch of giant robot arms, and there's like one person just kind of ministering to the machines. So, and then most people listening to this would agree that they're seeing malls and stores close around them because brick and mortar retail is getting pushed into oblivion. And most people don't think of that as like a high technology or automation story, but it kind of is, because Amazon is sucking up $20 billion more in e-commerce every year. And Amazon's investing billions of dollars in robo warehouses and AI and fulfillment and everything else. And so that's why 30% of American malls are going to close in the next 4 years. And working in a retail establishment is the most common job in the country. I mean, it's almost 1 in 10 American workers who works in retail. And the average retail worker is a 39-year-old woman who makes $11 to $12 an hour. And so what happens to those literally millions of retail workers when the malls close? Now, the one that you're quoting me on is that when truckers get replaced, it's going to be madness, chaos, and violence. Because if you look at the numbers, there are 3.5 million truckers in this country. It's the most common job in 29 states. 94% male, average age 49, average education high school. And I spoke to 100 truckers online last week. And a year ago, I was like, hey, guys, robot trucks are coming. And they were like, get out of here. Like, that's never going to happen. And then this year, I'm like, hey, guys, robot trucks are coming. And this year, they're like, we've got to make that, like, we've got to lobby so that that's not possible. So they now accept that technologically that's feasible, but they're like, we have to keep that from happening.
So is there a coming war with the robots that we have to get ready for? Or there's another idea here, I think, as opposed to actually battling them like in Terminator. It's something different. From what I understand, this is the issue that made you run for president.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, we are in the third inning of the greatest economic and technological transformation in the history of the world. And none of our politicians have any meaningful responses to it. They can't even acknowledge it. Most of them don't understand technology. And anyone who's been paying attention to what's going on in D.C. knows that our legislators have no idea about technology. And so if you go to them and say, hey, guys, I have friends who are investing billions of dollars in AI that's going to replace the 2.5 million Americans who work in call centers that make $14 an hour right now. Like, politicians just look at you like you have a second head. And so I went to D.C. and I tried to talk to leaders in the Democratic Party primarily because I'm friendlier with them. And no one had any meaningful response to me what is the central challenge that, again, led to Donald Trump's being elected. I mean, if you go around the country, how did Donald Trump win all of these Midwestern swing states? It's because they've lost 4 million manufacturing jobs, and they're very, very angry and depressed as a result.
So if large swaths of Americans are out of work because of automation and there's no new jobs for them, what risks could that pose to our society?
Well, so in my book, I talk about this, where my friends in Silicon Valley say that we're 5 to 10 years away from truckers losing their jobs. And only 13% of truckers are unionized, so it's very hard to have some mass negotiation. So let's imagine that you're a bunch of truckers, you start losing your jobs. What are the odds of some of them rallying together and saying, let's go protest, let's block some highways? A lot of them are like have guns. I mean, about 100,000 of them are ex-military. And so to me, that is a much more likely scenario than that hundreds of thousands of truckers just shrug and say, well, I guess we had a good run. Like I was making $46,000 a trucker, and now I guess I'll go home and make zero. And so and if you look at what happened to the manufacturing workers in the Midwest, many of them went on disability, and then many of them started drinking themselves to death and doing drugs. And so if you look at it, our life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years, in part because of a surge in suicides and drug overdoses that are centered in many of these communities.
So for you, one of the remedies for this is universal basic income was the big issue that you're running on.
Yes.
Tell people, we'll break it down, but in a nutshell, what is universal basic income?
So universal basic income is a policy where every citizen or member of a society gets a certain amount of money, free and clear, no questions asked, to do whatever you want. So my plan, the freedom dividend, would give every American adult $1,000 a month to do whatever you want. And that may seem dramatic or fantastic, but if you look at our history, Thomas Paine was for this at the founding of the country, and a law just like this passed the House of Representatives twice in 1971. Martin Luther King was for it, Richard Nixon was for it, and 1,000 economists, including Milton Friedman, signed a letter saying this would be great for the economy and society. So anyone listening to this, if you're an adult between 18 to 64, Andrew Yang wants to give you $1,000 a month. And if you're a parent, when they turn 18, they get the freedom dividend too. And what a game changer that would be. I've got 2 young kids, and everyone's freaked out about the cost of educating their kids now because college costs have gone up 250%.
So let's break this down a little bit for people. How did you get to the number of $1,000 a month?
Well, it's based on a plan by a guy named Andy Stern, who used to run the biggest labor union in the country, the SEIU. So imagine this. Imagine the most powerful labor leader of his generation writes a book and says the future of labor is no labor. We are screwed. And we need to move to another way of distributing value and work in society. So I read this book, and I had read other books that suggested the same thing, but I never read one by someone who'd argued for labor for decades. I was reading them from, frankly, technologists and entrepreneurial types. And so the Roosevelt Institute studied his plan and found that it would grow the consumer economy by 10 to 12%. It would create 4 million new jobs, because right now 57% of Americans can't pay an unexpected $500 bill. So if you put $1,000 in their hands, they're going to spend it on car repairs and tutoring for their kids and the occasional night out. So it's going to go right back into the economy. It's going to create millions of jobs. And it doesn't disrupt the labor market much, because the poverty line in this country is $12,770 a year. So if, let's say, you're a server at a restaurant, you're making $24,000 a year, and I say, hey, great news, President Yang is in power and you're getting $1,000 a month, are you going to quit your job? I mean, if you quit your job, you get a 50% pay cut and you're having trouble making ends meet anyway. But if you keep your job, maybe you cut back one shift, then you can save a little bit. You can spend an extra night with your kid. So this plan was not originally my plan. This was a plan proposed by Andy Stern and then studied by the Roosevelt Institute.
So I'm chatting with Andrew Yang, who wants to give you $1,000 each between 18 and 64. He's running for president. So the big question, I'm sure everyone's mind, is how do you pay for this?
So one thing I want to comment, too, is that anyone who's thinking this can't be done, this has happened in one state where now every person in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked. And that state's Alaska, where a Republican governor passed the oil dividend in 1982. And it's now wildly popular and everyone loves it. So it can be done. And so one comparison I ask people, and this is to your question.
Sure.
Alaska used oil money. What is the oil of the 21st century here in America?
Technology?
Technology, that's right.
I got it right.
Yes,
you did. Is there a prize, $1,000?
Yes, you get $1,000 a month.
Maybe. That would be some kind of universal, just one-time basic income. Because I'm talking to Ron right here. I'd like to talk about Ron about basic income. He's my producer. So go ahead.
So the trap America is in right now is that the big winners from artificial intelligence and self-driving cars and trucks and advanced robotics are going to be really, really big tech companies like Amazon and Google and Facebook that don't pay a lot of taxes. Amazon's move is to say, didn't make any money this quarter, no taxes necessary, even though Jeff Bezos is now worth like $160 billion.
And getting tax breaks to come to places like New York and Northern Virginia.
Yes, which I would incidentally do away with as president. I would make any of those tax benefits 100% taxable and thus eliminating them, because it makes no sense to have communities in the U.S. like falling over themselves, like to bribe really wealthy companies to come there. It's a zero-sum game. We're all the same country. I mean, what are we doing? This is dumb. So Amazon's move is to say it didn't make any money. Google's move is to say it all went through Ireland. So the trap we're in is that the biggest winners are going to be not paying into the public coffers, even as they're soaking up more and more work and value. So the big change we have to make as a society is we have to put a mechanism in place to be able to gain from artificial intelligence and all these new technologies. And the most efficient way to do that is to join every other industrialized country in the world and pass a value-added tax. because our economy is now so big at $19 trillion, a value-added tax at even half the European level would give the public a tiny slice of every Amazon purchase and every Google search, and it would raise enough money with existing spending and economic growth and cost savings and the fact that we'd be making our people, ourselves, stronger, healthier, better educated, more mentally well, more productive, that we could pay for $1,000 per American adult per month.
So the VAT, the value-added tax, would be a tax on any good or service in the country, a national tax.
It's essentially a consumption tax, but you have to look and see that we're giving every adult $1,000 a month. So it would end up increasing the purchasing power of approximately the bottom 92% of the population. And if you're wealthy, and I have some wealthy friends, they prefer this tax than like a wealth tax or something like that, because they say, well, I can always like buy a slightly smaller boat or whatever. Right. And then I say, are you really going to do that? They're like, no, I'm going to buy the same boat.
Well, what do you say to people who would say that value-added taxes are inherently regressive? And they are. It's not a big tax. You're talking about 10%, but 10% to someone low income is more painful than 10% to someone who's upper middle class or middle class. Is that just a sacrifice that we have to do together?
Well, it would be regressive in a vacuum, but keep in mind, we're using it to fund $1,000 in everyone's pockets. And so again, unless you're spending like, over $100,000 a year, you're going to end up being a net winner. And that's the vast majority of us. So in a vacuum, yes. But if you're giving all that money and then some to the American people, then it's very progressive in impact.
And what about the people? Look, I love the idea of giving people money. I think, I mean, I want the government, we'll talk about it in a few minutes, to guarantee health care for all.
Me too.
The idea, yeah, and it's something that we believe in very much as progressives. So what do you do, though? You give this money to people, but what about people who lost their jobs to automation? Is there a way, or is that more state by state than a national plan to actually get them working again? Because most people, almost everyone wants to work. There's a sense of self-worth involved. I know for me there is. I can say that, to be honest. So
no, it's true for just about everyone.
Right. So what do you do? Is there some national plan you can do, or does that have to be more regional, state by state, to get people working again who have lost jobs to automation? Well,
so the thing I've become very certain of is that the most dramatic pro-employment thing we could do would be to put economic resources into everyone's hands. Because again, if you look at a town of 50,000 people in Missouri, if they're getting another $50 million in consumer buying power every month, then that's going to make every business on Main Street there much more viable. It's going to have those businesses hire more people. It's going to keep wages steady. I mean, I've traveled this country, and right now, Main Street businesses are closing right and left. So the fantasy, the danger we're in right now is you say, oh, the government is going to find a way to create jobs or retrain workers. I've looked into the success or lack of success, really, of government-funded retraining programs. And they're abysmal. They're terrible. Like, they essentially don't work at all. It's like effectiveness rates of like 0 to 15%. And then the government's like, well, you're retrained, like it was great. And then the person has some certificate that's from some nonsense place, and no one wants. And one of the jokes I tell, but it's true. You look at the average truck driver, who's a 49-year-old guy. He didn't like school 25 years ago. It's like no reason to think all of a sudden he's like, oh, now I love it and right. I'm going to be great at it. And if you're an employer and you have a choice between a 50-year-old with a bad back who's been sitting in a truck for like X years, or some 25-year-old kid out of like community college who also wants less money, unfortunately, like, so you have to be real. Like, it's irresponsible when politicians talk as if we can retrain millions of workers. And I looked into what happened to the displaced manufacturing workers in the Midwest. The reason they're so angry is that half of them left the workforce and never worked again. And then half of them that left the workforce filed for disability. There are now more Americans on disability than work in construction, as one example. And so politicians like hand wave and say like, oh, we're going to retrain. But then they just go back to their salad. I mean, honestly, like they don't actually get out of their office and be like, I'm going to go to the Midwest and like retrain some people. And if they did, they would see that it's really, really difficult.
That's a great point, because we tend to hear this kind of remedy for any type of problem losing their job is just retrain them to something else. But if there's no other jobs in that area, and tell me if I'm getting this right, if you prime the pump in a way by giving money to people, then the biggest component of our GDP is consumer consumption.
Yes.
So you're doing that, and by that you might create more jobs, and they get hired organically as opposed to some weird
Yes.
fake thing.
Yes. And this is something that...
Get it, Andrew. You're
Yes.
onto something.
No, because
Sincerely.
we have to get real again. Like, we as a country are really excellent at modifying capital flows. It's about the only thing we're good at. Or as my friend Andy Stern jokes, it's like our government is terrible at many things, but it is excellent at sending large numbers of checks to large numbers of people promptly and reliably. So if the federal government was like, hey, we're going to like create millions of jobs, it's like they'd be terrible at that. And you'd end up leading to all sorts of bizarre make-work jobs and a giant bureaucracy and like the rest of it. And studies have shown that if you did that sort of job creation, those people would be unable to transition into private employment afterwards because no one regards that work experience as viable or valuable. Whereas if we just put money into people's hands, then you could build jobs in each community that are based upon what people actually need and want in those towns.
And Andrew, you also make a great point that economists, I think without exception, would agree. When you give people who are lower or middle income more money, they spend it. Wealthy
Yes.
people tend to put it in their account because they don't need it. They could buy what they wanted before.
Yeah.
But when you give someone who's middle class a bonus at the end of the year of $5,000, they tend to spend
They
that
spend it.
on anything from credit card debt to actually buying some of their family a new television, and that helps the economy when they're buying products. So this is important. Why give it? So my question is naturally, as I'm sure others have the same thought, why give it to the billionaire? Is that just because you have to have this egalitarian view to the whole plan, like everyone gets it and that's it?
Well, part of it is you do want to universalize it, make it a right of citizenship, and it is opt-in. So the billionaire could say, like, "Yeah, I'm
it's
not
opt-in.
going
Okay,
to get
All right.
that." But if you look at it, something like the earned income tax credit, which I'm a huge fan of, about 30% of people that are eligible for it don't get it because of administration. They don't know how to apply for it. So you have to destigmatize it. You have to universalize it, and you just have to say, "Look, we don't care. You're a citizen. Here's $1,000." And if Jeff Bezos gets his $1,000 check, I mean, like, it doesn't matter to us because he's going to be paying millions into the pot.
Right.
So that, to me, it's much more powerful if we universalize and say, this is just, you're an owner and shareholder of the richest, most advanced society in the history of the world, and if you want a dividend, it's yours.
So for people who are listening and they're more economically moderate to conservative, from what I read and I understand, please explain this, that this would actually save on some government outlays in other areas.
Oh, yeah, very much so. So the first thing is we spend $800 billion on 126 welfare programs right now. And those programs, many people rely upon them week to week and month to month. And I am not some hack like libertarian who's like, oh, I get rid of these programs, because people need them.
Sure.
And so, but you can lighten up the bureaucracy on many of these programs by replacing them with straight cash. And one story I tell is I have a friend whose sister is on disability, and she won't even volunteer in her community because she's afraid someone's going to see her as able-bodied and then take those benefits away. And we all know that's terrible. That's tragic. Sure. And we have millions of Americans who are in that boat. So if you go to them and say, hey, guess what? Like, you're going to get the cash anyway. Like, how many of them might feel better? And right now, the rate at which people get off of long-term disability is literally 0%. Like, nobody ever actually wakes up and says, hey, I feel better. It turns out I'm not disabled. So, and that's because of the way those programs are designed. So we can lighten up the administration and save costs there, but we can also, more importantly, reverse some of these destructive incentives we have where it punishes people for doing better.
So let's take a quick break. I'm chatting with Andrew Yang. We're going to come back, talk about a little bit more about the universal basic income, but some other issues that he's out there championing. And what you're hearing, I'm very curious, what you're hearing in Iowa and New Hampshire when you bring up universal basic income, and what a response of just, mom and dad and, people on the street. So let's take a break, come back with more of the Dean Obeidallah Show right after this.
The Dean Obeidallah Show.
Voting is the most important civil right of our era because the right to vote preserves all other rights. It's not the Second Amendment. It's not guns. It's voting.
SiriusXM Progress.
New perspectives, important voices, influential ideas. This is the Dean Obadala Show on SiriusXM Progress 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show. We're live right here, December 17th, with Andrew Yang, Democrat running for president. He's been to Iowa, New Hampshire 6 times. Both of them.
Yes.
Tomorrow, Iowa. And you've been talking about universal basic income because, as I told you, somebody called me and there's been articles written about you. What do people in the heartland in Iowa think when you talk about universal basic income?
So Iowa is a predominantly rural state, and a woman from Iowa said this would be more transformative for our small town economy than anything anyone else is talking about. And if you go to people in Iowa and you say to them, hey, have you noticed stores closing in your area? They say yes. I mean, their stores are closing right and left, as you can imagine. And then you ask them, why is that? And they say Amazon, and because they have Amazon too. In Iowa and New Hampshire. And then you ask them, well, what are you going to do about it? And then they really start thinking. They're like, what the heck can I do about that? Like, I just thought that's like a law of nature.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And then what I suggest is like, well, what I want to do as president is I want to get $1,000 from the value that's like flying up into the cloud in Seattle, return it to you and the people in your town, and then let you rebuild your Main Street economy, build a trickle-up economy from your families and your communities up. And they look at me and they say, we can do that? And I say, you are the Democrats of Iowa or in New Hampshire. You decide what we can do as a country. And then a light bulb goes off and they're like, oh my gosh, he's right. Like, it is up to us. And so as a result, the people in Iowa and New Hampshire are rallying around this message. It's one reason why I'm going back to Iowa this week is I was invited to headline a progressive event in Des Moines because they know that what I'm talking about is more of a difference maker for their day-to-day lives than what anyone else is talking about.
And I think it's great that you share what you're actually hearing from people in the Midwest who are the early decision makers and how it's resonating with them. Because I can sit here and listen and intellectually think about it. I'm like, oh, this is an interesting idea. And I understand a little bit of economics and you prime the pump and people spend the money and I get all that. But to me, it's more instructive to hear from those people. And on some level, Bernie Sanders was on the vanguard of Medicare for All. Now it's mainstream. He went from like, you got to be kidding me, to
everyone's going to be for it.
Democrat,
I'm for it.
Right, so you're for healthcare for all. And I know Hillary Clinton actually considered universal basic income and rejected it, but actually, from what I read, saw some benefits, but didn't think, I don't know if America was ready for it.
Her name for it was Alaska for Everyone. Hillary is not a great brander.
Alaska for Everyone. You're right, because you think Sarah Palin. So, look, if you get the nomination and all goes well, you have to take on Donald Trump. How do you win the nomination first? And then we'll talk about how do you beat Trump.
Sure. So the way I become the nominee is that the people in first Iowa and New Hampshire, then around the country, wake up to the fact that our economy is changing forever. That we're in the third inning of the greatest economic and technological transformation in the history of the world. And we need bold new solutions. We need a new vision, a progressive vision for our economy that includes the freedom dividend. And so as that vision becomes more and more real to Democrats around the country, we're gonna shock the world. I mean, we're going to perform so strongly. I've been to Iowa 7 times, and I have to say, some of the people that you imagine are going to do well there are not going to do well there, and I'm going to do very, very well there. So I can win the nomination, and then if I go against Donald Trump, I've already had many, many Trump supporters come to me and say, you're addressing the same problems he was talking about. You're an outsider. You want to shake things up. I will support you. Where political alignment, you know this, Dean, in the United States is something of a horseshoe where like the ends start touching again.
Yes.
So I'm getting a bunch of Bernie supporters, but also a bunch of Donald Trump supporters. I don't need them all. I only need really like 10% of them. And so the message I have for people is that the problems are real, but Donald Trump's solutions are to freeze time and turn the clock backwards and somehow, make it the 60s or 70s again. And I want to do the exact opposite. I want to turn the clock forwards and reverse this disaster of a presidency, because the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian guy who likes math.
That's great. And so if Donald Trump starts attacking you on Twitter and belittling you, you've never run for office before, how would you react? Would it bother you? Would you ignore it?
Oh, we're looking forward to that day. And Donald Trump even said at a rally in West Virginia, he said he cannot wait to run against these Democrats. But his one fear was that some new person was going to come out of nowhere and take him on. And that's me. And so we have a joke in the office about what his nickname for me is going to be, and we came up with Comrade Yang.
Comrade Yang, and
yes, because it's like vaguely racist. But that's going to be a great day for the campaign. I'm going to get a lot of new social media followers that day.
I agree with you. I actually wrote an article for CNN last year about Donald Trump, please mock me on Twitter. And I put sample tweets that I want them to copy and paste, like Dean's Low Energy, don't listen to his Sirius XM show for 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on channel 127, #loser, that kind of stuff, because it actually elevates you if you're at a certain level. Another level is annoying, and it can be racist and bigoted. We saw that. I hope it's actually, I was really curious. Your slogan is humanity first, which to me is the opposite of Donald Trump. What does humanity first mean to you?
You know, what's funny is that when people see humanity first, like, you know, at first it seems kind of radical. You're like, wow, humanity first, like, whoa, that's really out there. But then you think about it for a second, you're like, what the heck else should be first? You know, it's like capital first, or like robots first. Like, nothing else makes sense. But we have to be honest about where our economy is heading, where our economy is going to turn on more and more humans. And we're not talking just about truckers and warehouse workers. We're also talking about lawyers and accountants and pharmacists and other white-collar professionals. I mean, like, we have to evolve as fast as we can into a more human-centered economy because time is working against us.
Absolutely. And I think Donald Trump, frankly, no joking, it's cruelty first. I mean, to me, his currency is cruelty.
It's almost inhumanity first.
It actually is. Inhumanity would be actually the good flip side. Let's take a quick break. Come back with Andrew Yang the last couple of minutes here on the Dean Obeidallah Show.
Dean Obeidallah Show on Sirius XM Progress 127. The Dean Obeidallah Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
Welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live right here, Monday, December 17th, in studio with Andrew Yang, entrepreneur, lawyer, now Democratic candidate for Congress, for president. I'm so used to saying Congress for the whole last 6-7 months.
Don't worry about it.
For president of the United States of America, heading out to Iowa tomorrow. Now, your big thing, universal basic income. If people want to find out more about that or you, what's the website?
Sure. Just go to yang2020.com, or you can Google my name, Andrew Yang. You can find out about the history of universal basic income, which I've now branded the freedom dividend, and the impact it will have on people's lives every day. We can make our country stronger on the family level.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that you made such a good point in the middle of the interview where you talk about these people out of work, and the politicians, in earnest, well-intentioned as they want to be, have no solution, nothing of worth that's changed their lives for the better. So why not take a chance with trying universal basic income or some form of universal basic income to make a difference? Because, you made a great point. You actually studied the issue of re-educating people, and they're not getting jobs. So you're feeling good about them. Oh, look, we educated them to sit at home.
Yeah. 94% of the new jobs created in this country are temp, gig, or contractor jobs that don't have benefits. And everyone's in these weird dead end. Someone called it dance for your money jobs. Where you stop dancing and then you don't get money and you die.
I talk for your money job like this one. Exactly. I know what you're talking about. Andrew, so we're out of time. Andrew, thank you very much, my friend. I wish you the best. Good luck tomorrow in Iowa. I look forward to chatting with you again in the future. We'll have you on one day. I'd love to have you on from Iowa. Give us a call and tell us what's going on, what you've heard from the people.
I love that, man. I'm there a lot.
All right. Thanks, Andrew. So, folks, we're going to take a break. When we come back, Rick Unger is going to be here for the hour. We'll chat with him about a lot of the issues. Maybe I'll ask him about universal basic income. I wonder what his response will be. Be right back. More of Dean Obeidallah Show.